Okay, so my name is Nicole Case, and I was assigned Module 10 Information Processing. So the first slide is learning is influenced by how we process information. Some information is more easily learned because of how we think about the information. Other information is more difficult to pay attention to or memorize because of how we process the information. As educators, we need to be aware of these different processing and learning information. The second slide is attention is an important process for learning. In my opinion, attention is probably one of the most important processes for learning because if you're not paying attention, then you can't retain any of the information. We cannot possibly pay attention to all of the information surrounding us, but we can find or focus different things to pay attention to for some of the information and ignore all the other information. So, teachers need to be able to assist students in paying attention to important information or class material while helping them ignore distractions or unimportant stimuli. So, for example, this could be having students have sticky notes for their textbooks and being able to write down the important parts, being able to have a graphic organizer for them to be able to pick out the important parts of information, or just having some sort of catchback for students to not stare out the window and kind of catch their attention when you're lecturing. Prior knowledge and experience provide a meaningful context for new information to be learned. So, this is, for example, if you visit the White House in Washington, D.C., you're more likely to be able to retain the information of how things are important at the White House or different tasks or connecting old information with new information and prior knowledge. I just had this experience a few weeks ago when I was driving through Seneca Falls with my daughter, and I was explaining to her about how I remember a lot of the information of women's rights because of a field trip that I had taken back in 2005 or 2006, and how important women's rights was and what the different buildings and statues were, and how Susan B. Anthony and people were basically just trying to stand up for what they believe in. Anywho, humans are active processors of information. Other learning theories focus on how the environment influences learning, more passive, whereas the information processing approach assumes that humans are active participants in the learning process. Students will purposefully study and memorize new information. Perception and attention. Perception is the interpretation of the sensory information we encounter that helps us understand the environment. It's very much an interpretation, as not everyone experiences the same sensory information in the same way. An example from the text would be: some people love the taste of beets, but I hate them. My husband insists that the recliner in our living room is brown, but it's sage green. Bottom and top processing. Bottom up processing means that we begin with specific features of stimuli and automatically piece these features together without using conscious awareness to experience an entire object. So, for an example, we use basic features to help interpret a word when reading. These features might include lines, curves, and when we put the lines and curves together, we interpret them as a word. Consciously using our prior knowledge, expectations, or context to perceive stimuli is called top down processing. An example of this would be misspelling a word when writing a paper and read over that paper a dozen times without noticing the misspelled word. This is because we use our prior knowledge of what we know the word should be and process the word as it was intended, not as it was misspelled. Thankfully, we have uh, ABC word check to be able to get the little red lines on the bottom of the word to say, hey, you spelled this wrong. Attention is the process of focusing on certain aspects to all the stimuli in our environment at one time. We select a small amount to focus on or attend to. So, as you can see on the information processing model, it shows that the attention is circled as that is where it is in the information processing model. For example, right now I'm paying attention to my homework and not my daughter who is trying to pretend that she's working out behind me. Automatic processing, skills that are applied without conscious thought to accomplish fairly easy or familiar tasks. So this has a picture of autopilot on and off. This can be used as an example of driving to work but not knowing how you got there because you were just on autopilot driving, which isn't safe, but it happens all the time. And then another encoding information is effortful processing, providing conscious attention to difficult or new tasks. So in this little cartoon I have, you have to study for tests, dummy. You can't just put a memory stick in your ear. So this is basically saying you have to sit and read and retain the information. You know it. You can't just not pay attention and then know it. That's putting effort forth. Divided attention or the ability to focus on multiple stimuli. However, educators should be cautious of students claiming they can multitask. Most often, students are not doing two tasks at once, but rather switching their attention back and forth between tasks. So, Buzz Lightyear is saying distraction, distraction everywhere. I basically think of this as when I'm cleaning my house, I'll do the dishes and then realize that my rug next to my sink is dirty. So then I'll put that in the laundry and then, oops, my laundry's going. I need to go vacuum the floor. And then I'll realize that I never even finished doing the dishes. That would be a divided attention. Selective attention is the ability to focus on one stimulus and ignore all the others, tuning things out. In my house, we call this selective hearing. In the picture here, I think of my grandfather growing up, and he's watching the Yankee game, and my grandmother and I are talking, and he's tuned it to the TV and completely ignoring what we're talking about. And we're actually trying to have a conversation with him, and he has no idea what we're saying. Memory has three components: encoding, storage, and retrieval. So, encoding is transforming information into a form that can be stored in a memory. Storing is maintaining the coded information in memory, and retrieving is re-accessing information from the past which has been encoded and stored. So, number one, encoding, which is the process by which information or stimulus enter our memory. Attention is an important part of encoding information. We cannot encode information if we are not paying attention to it. Back to what I said on slide 2, attention is one of the most important aspects of retaining information. Retrieval. This is the process by which information is obtained from memory. Remembering things like your birthday is intentional, to where you get a song stuck in your head, which is unintentional. Storage is the process in which information is held or kept between encoding and retrieval. We use the term process to define storage. Sensory memory. Sensory memory is all the sensory information is processed. This is the information that you aren't even consciously aware of. So, being able to remember what something feels like, remembering what a car hears like, remembering what snow looks like, the smell of freshly baked cookies is in our sensory memory, and the taste of something as delicious as pumpkin spice or apple cider. Short term memory. This is the structure that temporarily holds information from sensory memory that we are attending to until the information is either no longer attended to or moved to long-term memory. This is a great little understanding graphic of getting the memory, the sensory memory, a fraction of a second, then your attention, then your short term memory, which is less than a minute, and that goes back and forth, and then forgetting it. And then on the bottom, long term memory is retrieving and encoding it. But then again, you're outputting it to not remembering it. I always think of Dory from uh, Finding Nemo. Thank you, Lily. Yes, Finding Nemo. And how she always forgets where her and Nemo, or Darwin, I think the dad's name is, how they always forget where they're going, or she forgets. Chunking, organizing information into smaller units or meaningful bits of information. This helps effectively reduce the number of bits you have to remember. So, having a slideshow of the important information from the chapter versus going through and reading every little sentence from the chapter. This can help you be able to understand and retain the information better. Interference is when new information from sensory memory comes into short term memory and interferes with old information. Maintenance rehearsal is which involves repeating information over and over again to keep attention activated. For example, remembering this number 6843, 6843, 6843, 6843, just saying it over in your head until you actually need that number, either writing it down or going back and forth between your phone. Elaborative rehearsal. So remembering Henry Harrison the Ninth. Henry has 9 Harry sons. Remembering that in your head. Your working memory, the information we are thinking about or attending to at the moment in short term memory is also considered this. So the working memory has a few different parts to it. The central executive, phonological loop, episodic buffer, and the visual spatial scratch pad. These two we don't really talk about in this chapter, but we'll touch on those. The phonological loop is the subsystem responsible for briefly processing verbal or auditory information, responsible for what we hear and what we are going to rehearse when we say. It's called a loop because there's a limited amount of times you can remember something. That this differs between languages, but in English, the common amount of syllables you can say most is about 6, so that's about 2 seconds. Examples of this would be memorizing a phone number. So once again, repeating those numbers over and over. And as you can see here, it just keeps going as a loop. Visual spatial sketchpad. It's the subsystem in Baddeley's model is responsible for briefly processing visual information. So this can be seen in a few different aspects. Working memory allows us to visualize things, for example, a roadmap in your head to get from home to work, allowing different types of landmarks, and turn left at the house that has a red mailbox. Or all things our working memory allows us to utilize. Episodic buffer. It's responsible for integrating information from the visual spatial sketchpad and phonological loop, as well as linking information in working memory to long term memory. Some also say they connect together like a movie in the words and they involve time in with each other. Without this, you can't have others. So think of if your movie is off by a second and the lips are moving but the voices aren't going, that's where the episodic buffer is off. You want those to be integrated very tightly to be a regular working movie. So memory of visual digits such as a keypad is also common because it's so familiar to us. So if you think about a keypad, we have a keypad on our phones, we have a keypad on ATM machines, we have a keypad on our computers, we have a keypad on credit card machines in the store. So this episodic buffer is where it holds and integrates diverse information, and you can kind of see that working together in the rehearsal as the arrows are going. And the main concept is central executive, which is what we're going to touch on right now. The central executive is the subsystem of Baddeley's model. It does not store information, but it manages or oversees the flow of information between the other 3 systems. The central executive subsystem focuses our attention on important, relevant information while ignoring other information, hence the central executive. So in this doc or this image here, you can see that the uh, central executive is the prefrontal cortex, which is also managing and working with the attention controller, the phonological loop, the episodic buffer, and the visual spatial sketch. Long-term memory. It holds all of the information we have learned, experienced. Unlike the other memory system, long term memory does not seem to have a capacity or duration limit. It is believed that people can store an indefinite number of memories for an unlimited duration. And there's three parts of it: episodic, which is the images, the somatic, which is facts and general knowledge, and the third is procedural, how to do things. I always think of the movie, it's the Disney movie, has joy in it. I can't think of what it's called right now. But they always get the memory balls, and the little girl will have a memory, and it'll be sad, joy, anger, disgust, and they each have their own memory. And then they go in, and during the movie, they show what the memory is, and this is where she learns how to play hockey. This is where she has the visual images of what she did, how she remembers how to do her math. That's that for that. The episodic memory includes the episodes from your life, as I just discussed. This is a personal information of feelings and taken back in a time into a particular event. This is called autobiographical um, memory. Some of these memories are considered flash bulb memories because they tend to be frozen in time as they have heavy emotional component. Semantic memory in more depth is involves information that we have not tied directly to our personal experiences. You probably know that there are 365 days in a year, but don't have a personal memory of learning that information. That's just a fact. Procedural memory is information about how you'd perform a certain task, writing your name, walking across the floor, putting your contacts in, um, thinking back when you learned how to drive a car. You put forth a lot of cognitive effort into attention to details. That's the effortful processing. But now with practice and experience of driving, you don't really have to think about these things, which is called automatic processing, going back to that autopilot thing that we had talked about a few slides ago. Here's some good visual examples. Um, Episodic memory. It's like a movie in your head. Somatic memory. So apples, you know that they're edible, they're fruit, they have a stem, they have seeds, they grow from trees, they're red and round, and they're sweet. This is knowledge that we learned over many interactions, to where episodic memory is a memory from a certain event that we've experienced. So remembering back when your class went to go pick apples when you were in elementary school. Procedural memory. I have no idea what I'm doing here. So clearly, the bear is in the middle of nowhere and he has no idea how he got there, what he's doing. He was just walking along, going along, kind of like if we were to drive our car to work and not knowing why we were there, or walking around in the house and going to a different room, going, why am I even in here? How to apply this to the classroom. I think that this is probably one of the most important slides because this is what we're here for. We're here because we want to be teachers. So we need to be loud and proud and get their attention and keep their attention. I have been in multiple different classrooms, as you all have as well. And there's a lot of different teaching strategies to do this. And I think being creative in the world that we live in now is really, really important to get their attention. Constant assessments. It doesn't always have to be um, written tests, but focus on the student's body language and be interactive. Being able to see the kid that's staring out the window or just staring at an outlet, clearly they are not focusing on you and they're not retaining any of the information. And it's our job as teachers to be able to give them attention that they need. So recognizing that and helping them. Three, making sure they understand the material and explain things that they may or may not understand. Just because they don't understand it the first time doesn't mean that they won't understand it the second time if you explain it differently. Giving them life experiences or understanding what they are interested in, maybe if it's basketball or soccer, being able to turn it somehow into whatever they can. So if little Johnny really likes soccer, and you tell him, okay, your team kicked it in the goal twice, and they did it in the second quarter. In the third quarter, they did it three more times. How many goals does your team have altogether? Something like that could really just help a kid. Number four, use exploratory questioning. Um, So some say the best way to learn information is to teach information to others. Students who can explain why an answer is correct are better able to remember that information. So being able to say, okay, what does this mean? Why is this information? And just like throwing the ball back at them and having them teach you the information. And then teaching, I don't really know if I'm going to pronounce this right. Uh, Mnemonics. This is basically just a strategy to help remember larger amounts of information. So acronyms Roy G. Biv is clearly red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. That's a great way to remember the rainbow. Rhyme, I before E, except after C for common spelling. And then spelling ones are desert and dessert are two different words because you want two S's in dessert for a sweet treat. So imagine them visually with a picture can help remember the meaning of a word as well. And consistency is key. Having the same routine in a classroom, having the same way that you do um, review and the same way that you do tests and having the same lighting and just the simple things to be able to have them consciously aware that, okay, this is the same thing every single day will help their memory more than you can even think. And that is all that I